All right, good evening. How are y'all doing? Woo, all right. Well, thank you all very much for being here. My name is Jeremy Markovich. I am the Director of Communications for the Program for Leadership and Character, and I really want to welcome you all here to Brendle Recital Hall for tonight's event. We are very, very excited. This is a very big crowd. Just so you know, this is a point of information. Michael Schur, who you're all here to see, was also at a couple of other universities around North Carolina over the last week. This is the biggest crowd that I've been able to see. So congratulations on winning the Michael Schur ACC Challenge, like by a long shot. I do want to welcome and thank our co-sponsors for tonight's event. That is the School of Divinity, the Department of Philosophy. Oh yes, round of applause, yeah. The Film and Media Studies program, and Wake the Arts. So, you know, they've helped, and thank the AV crew, other folks in the Program for Leadership and Character who all worked very hard to make this event happen. You may have a question that is on your mind, and that is the Program for Leadership and Character. What is that exactly? Well, the short version is we really, our animating principle is to put character at the center of leadership. And we work with faculty about how to integrate leadership and character into their courses. We work with students directly. We fund scholarships. We do all kinds of things. We hold events like this one here. We also do calls to conversations, many things. But one of the things, and if you are an undergrad here at Wake Forest, this is the part where please listen up because this is for you. We do discussion groups, and discussion groups are places where we just create a space to get together and talk about really big questions, the kind of questions that you might actually be hearing a lot about tonight. We call this discussion group the one we do, What is College For? Covers a lot of ground. Do we answer that question? Not necessarily, but we really create a space to get at really deep discussions, and it's just a wonderful thing that we do. The bad news is, you just missed that. It just wrapped up. The good news is we do that at the beginning of every semester. So after Christmas, you can sign up for that. And if you're really interested in learning more about our program right now, I don't know if this is happening right now. There was a QR code that was up cycling through earlier. If you didn't get a chance to scan it, go to leadershipandcharacter.wfu.edu. I know you're all going to remember that. But leadershipandcharacter.wfu.edu. And you can sign up for, we're having a discussion group about tonight's event, about the good place, about the good place and the good life. We're doing one about character in the law. We're doing one about entrepreneurship and characters in film. So really great events, really great stuff, and a great way to plug in with our program. And I really encourage you all to get that, to check that out. So one of the things about me is I am relatively new to moral philosophy, and a lot of what I learned, a lot of where what I first encountered it was on an NBC show called The Good Place. Maybe you've heard of it. It's a great show. I think that's why we're all here. And that show was written and created by a man named Michael Schur. Michael Schur, he got a start on Saturday Night Live. He was a writer and producer on The Office, where you may know him as Dwight Schrute's cousin Mose. Yes? You all in the front know this directly. You have Mose t-shirts. This is fantastic. So they all came prepared for tonight. But from there, he went on to co-create shows like Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Co-created Parks and Recreation. And created The Good Place. And in the course of that, consulted with all kinds of moral philosophers, did a lot of reading and research, and has written a book about sort of the behind the scenes of the workings of The Good Place. It's called How to Be Perfect. And it's a great book. It really is, it really does talk about a lot of the things that our program talks about, but much funnier. And it's really great, and we're going to be hearing all about the book, about television, a lot about just everything Michael Schur tonight. So our program tonight is being moderated by our Director of Programming, Ann Phelps. And without further ado, here's Michael Schur.
Are y'all hearing us? All right. This is a great crowd. Good job, Wake Forest. How cool is this? I love seeing y'all here tonight. And again, Mike, thank you so much for joining us. Jeremy, thank you for the great introductions. And we're going to jump on in and hear a little bit from the creator of The Good Place, the writer of How to Be Perfect. But I'm actually going to start with a question that many of you in this room, actually before we get started, who all has seen The Good Place all the way through? Excellent. Who has never seen an episode? Awesome.
Get out.
Not welcome. There may be some spoilers. We're going to put that on you tonight. It's a great show with lots of cliffhangers. But in the meantime, I want to hear, and this is a question that many of you have heard from me over the years, many, many times. We talk a lot in our program about this word moral exemplars, which is really just an obnoxiously academic way of saying role models. And I often ask students, who is your greatest role model in history or fiction or your family? And so I want to know, Mike, who of the characters you have written could you consider a moral exemplar?
Jason Mendoza. I want the people who've never seen an episode to be lost right from the beginning. I want you to get nothing out of this. Moral exemplars. Well, the point of The Good Place, I think, was that we are all works in progress, right? They were the main characters in that show all had deep flaws that caused them and the people in their lives some pain and anguish, and the show is really about the project of moving to a place where they were better people. And so I don't think it's any of them, unless you want to just say that like that as a concept. That is my personal belief about the world, is that we are all works in progress. The important thing isn't being perfect or something, but rather is that we care one way or the other whether we do good things or try to be good people. Leslie Knope, I would say, of the characters that I've written in my life.
Correct answer.
Give it up for Leslie. How many of you have never seen an episode of Parks and Recreation? I'm kidding. I think Leslie had a lot of qualities that I think are very lovely in people. She was indefatigable. She believed that optimism is better than pessimism. She was an incredibly hard worker. At one point late in the run of that show, one of our writers came in and said, I decided to try, based on the last few episodes, to figure out how much sleep it is even possible that Leslie gets per night, and the answer was 2.5 hours. So it's a little bit of a fantasy that you can be as hardworking as she is, but I think that her moral compass arrived in her pretty fully formed from a very young age, and I think that she had a quality that I truly love in people, which is that when she blew it, she said, I'm really sorry I blew it. And we did a number of stories on that show over the years where that was the point, that she did something, felt bad, knew it was a mistake, apologized. That is an underrated quality in people, I think. So it's probably her. I mean, the irony is that if there's another moral exemplar, it might be Ron Swanson, who had the complete opposite political philosophy, obviously, that she did, but he was rare among folks who espoused his particular political philosophy in that he actually practiced what he preached. He was a person who hated government so much that at one point he made a serious pitch that they remove all the stop signs and stoplights from the town, because he was like, the government shouldn't tell us when we can go or stop. Like, that was literally... But also he walked the walk, and I think that is another underrated quality is consistency, having the courage of your own convictions, which I think many people in this day and age maybe don't.
I really love that. Our colleague Brad Burrows, who's around here somewhere, runs a summer fellowship called Principled Pluralism, where we get students in the room of really different ideologies, and they go deep all summer on these things. And now we can tell them, you don't need to be a Principled Pluralism fellow, just watch Parks and Rec. We got it. Brad, you're fine.
That's right.
So I'm curious, Parks and Rec is my favorite show of all time, so it's really hard
for me. Is that true?
Oh, yes. Leslie Knope is my personal hero. I'm striving to sleep 2.5 hours a night. Not doing great. But when I watch The Good Place, it says at the beginning of every episode, created by Michael Schur. And my degree is in theology and the arts. Creator is a pretty big word. What does it mean to be the creator of the show?
So basically what it seems like, which is to say, so that show was created by me and Greg Daniels, who was my mentor, who was the one who adapted The Office from the British show to the American show, and then hired me on that show, and then he and I created Parks and Rec together. So created by means basically what it sounds like, which is the idea was yours, you teased it out, came up with the characters, executed the pilot episode, the first episode, saw that through production. When the show gets picked up, generally speaking, you stick around and you run the show. You're the sort of captain of the ship. Some people end up leaving shows that they created to go do other things, or because they get into fights with their bosses at the network or something. But generally speaking, it's like you're the person in charge. That the idea, importantly, that the idea for the show and the characters was yours. It didn't come from someone else.
So what do you do all day? Just take credit.
Yeah, you just you sit back and you let other people do all of the work, and you take all the credit. Yeah, it's a very ethical system.
It's what our director, Dr. Michael Lamb, did. He's on sabbatical.
Yeah, he's not even here.
I'm here.
So the creators of shows usually shift into something that's commonly called showrunner, which isn't a thing that you'll see in the credits. It's not an actual term. It just is it's a catch-all, or it's a sort of unofficial term, but it's like who's in charge. It's just who's in charge. So generally speaking, the creators of the show will then become the showrunners of that show, which just means you're the one, the buck stops with you. You're making every decision at some level is either being approved by you, or you've delegated someone to approve it on your behalf.
All right, so of the shows you've created, there's a lot of really cynical, incisive, thoughtful, dramatic shows on television. You create shows full of really hopeful, optimistic, warm tryhards, for lack of a better term. I love them, as someone who's a little bit inclined toward that myself. So my question is, why do you write these kind of characters when comedy could pretty easily be a pretty cynical business, and often it can take on that flavor? And the second layer of that question is not only why do you write such warm, authentic characters, but what effect does it have on you to dwell in that headspace of such wonderful people, even though they're flawed?
Yeah, right. There's no comedy without flaws. Even Leslie had her flaws.
No, false.
Man, you drank the Kool-Aid, huh? So it's part of this is just personal preference. I have always, comedy in general, this is a very broad delineation. Comedy comes from either pain or suburban boredom. So pain, it would be your underrepresented groups of folks, and that includes like Irish people when the Irish were immigrants, or the African American community, or women who have been traditionally marginalized in the field. A lot of comedy comes from working out your feelings about the fact that you live in a world that doesn't properly value you. The other side of it, my side of it, is suburban boredom, which is to say I grew up in a pretty medium, pleasant town. The worst thing that ever happened to me as a kid was my parents got divorced, which actually was the best thing that ever happened to me because they hated each other and shouldn't have got married. So that actually made my life better when that happened. And suburban boredom is your Monty Python, your SNL kind of, sketches and stuff. Very silly, and it's like if you don't make jokes, you're going to go crazy because you're out of boredom. So I have never personally connected to comedy that is cruel. And that doesn't mean a lot of the comedy that comes from the pain side of the equation isn't cruel. It's not like I had no affiliation or affinity for that group. It's just that regardless of what group it comes from, I don't like cruelty. I just never have responded to like put down humor or punching. I hate punching down. To me, punching down is just the lowest form of art. And what I think I liked a lot about silliness and suburban boredom humor is that it's not punching anywhere. It's just being weird. And so part of it is just that. Part of it is my personal preference. The other half of it I was best described by the writer David Foster Wallace, who is a favorite writer of mine. I don't know if any of you have ever read any of his stuff, but he did not like books written by a different author named Bret Easton Ellis, who wrote like American Psycho and writes really dark, like kind of like sick novels about like people who do each other harm. And someone asked him, why do you not like his novels? And his response was, look, we would all generally agree that the world is dark and sad and weird and awful and full of pain. And given the fact that we would all generally agree that that's true, it doesn't make much sense to me to write a book that just says, look how dark and weird and awful and full of pain and misery the world is. What makes sense to me, he said, is to say, okay, given that the world is dark and miserable and full of anger and pain, here is a prescription for how we might maneuver within that world, or even make that world better, or find a way to cope with that. Here's the art in his mind was a prescription. And that really kind of struck a chord with me, and I thought, like, he's writing like 1,500-page novels, and I'm writing 21-minute and 30-second long TV shows, but the idea is the same. Like, I don't like art that simply says, the whole idea of like holding up a mirror to society, that's not helpful, like, to me. Like, it's like, if I want to look at the society, I can just look at the society. I don't need the mirror. And I think what's much more helpful is people who create things that say, like, this is the situation, here's how we can deal with that situation. And so that's where the tryhards come from. It comes from people who believe in like slugging it out and kind of muddling through and trying to brighten the corners of their little world.
Yeah, that makes sense, because it was Parks and Rec that got me through maternity leave, which is all about that.
Sure.
That's why it's so deep in there. So after you write Parks and Rec, right, you turn to this show that is essentially a comedy about ethics. So if any of you have met any of us in the program for leadership and character, that's kind of right in the middle of our lane. So it has been really, really exciting. And so I am curious, how has learning about ethics, having to really dwell in this world, write creatively about it, write in a way that's funny about it, how has this impacted your sense of right and wrong and your sense of agency in the process of becoming perfect, if you will?
Yeah. So I get asked this a lot, like, am I a better person essentially because of the show? I have no idea. I really don't. I think that I think about the stuff more than I already did, which was too much. Like, I think I was like medium annoying before I wrote the show, and now I'm like solidly annoying.
Fair enough.
Like,
This is why everyone hates
Yeah.
moral philosophy professors.
Exactly.
Classic line.
So I was already, the reason I wrote this show is because I was already concerned with the topic. And so and it's not that I didn't learn anything, I learned a ton. Like, I read a ton of stuff and engaged with a ton of stuff I hadn't read before I started on the show, but it's all part and parcel. Like, I was already annoying to the point where like the biggest fights in my marriage were not like serious important things, but like fights about like the annoying degree to which I follow rules. Like, I've always been a rule follower, and I tend to like do what I'm told in the context of like where to stand, where to be, how to move through the world. And the biggest fight my wife and I ever had was on the bottle of mouthwash that I use at night. It says on the label, rinse for 30 seconds. So I would do that, and it had to be 30 seconds because that's what it said on the label. I didn't come up with this rule. The people at Listerine came up with this rule. And so what invariably would happen is I would drink the mouthwash, and I would start the clock, and my wife would come in and say, like, hey, I have to leave early for work tomorrow to get across town because I have a dentist appointment. Can you pick up the kids from school? And I would be like this. And then I would spit out, and I would try to answer the question, but she was already gone.
Yep.
She was like in the other room fuming because that's not a good way to go through life, right?
No,
Like
not great.
And so one of the things that happened when I, like in the doing of the show, one of the ways that I think I'm a better person is I realized, and this is a very Aristotelian idea, that just doing what the rule is isn't always in the moment the right thing to do. Like in that moment, the right thing to do is to spit out the mouthwash and help my wife untangle our schedule for the next day. So some of what made me a better person was undoing some of the work that I had done to make myself what I thought was a good person. But then I realized was just an annoying person that no one wanted to hang out with.
We're about to become those annoying people because I have so many strands I want to chase down on this concept of being too much of a good thing, right? That's what Aristotle would call a vice of excess. But before we do that, you learned a lot about ethics and philosophy in this process, as you have mentioned. Before we get to Aristotle, I want to hear a little bit about what you call in your book the big three. So how many of you have never taken an ethics course whatsoever? All right, this is all you need, then you're all done. So the big three Western schools of thought for ethics that you delve into, can you give us a recap on the other two? Just real quick.
Okay,
like
the
lightning round.
Okay, so deontology. Immanuel Kant, the main dude here, he believes that when you are about to do something, if you're in an ethical situation, you push pause. You enter like a sort of solitary chamber of reflection. You use your big, giant, juicy brain to discern a rule or maxim that you could will to be universal, meaning I am going to do, if I did this, and that means that everybody else would be allowed to do it too, what would the world be like if everybody else also did this thing? And if that world would be all screwed up or weird or wouldn't make any sense, you're not allowed to do it. And so you discern a rule that you could will to be universal, and then you act only out of a duty to follow that rule. You don't give money to a charity because it's nice to do that, or it will make me happy, or anything like that, or it will make the charity happy. You do it because you have discerned a maxim that says, I have a duty to give money to charities when I have the means to do that. That's called the categorical imperative. The other categorical imperative, number 2, is essentially don't use people as a means to an end. Don't use people to get what you want. So you're not allowed to lie to people because you're using that person to achieve the goal of whatever the lie is intended to achieve. So that's Kant. Kant is a stickler. He's an angry, uptight Prussian guy who no one liked, and he's very, very intense.
Not a deontologist.
I'm not. He was apparently, the legend is he was so rigid that the shopkeepers in Prussia would set their clocks and watches based on when he walked past their stores because he was so rigid in his schedule. That's probably apocryphal, but you get it. He was anal. He was kind of an anal guy. So the other school of thought, which actually preceded Kant slightly, is utilitarianism. Utilitarianism, generally speaking, there's a lot of different kinds of it, but generally speaking, it works on something called the greatest happiness principle, which is simply you do the thing that leads to the most total happiness and the least total pain. So you figure out what you're going to do, and you try to calculate how much happiness will generate, how quickly it will generate that happiness, how intense or long-lasting that happiness will be. You think about the pain it will cause. You run the same check. Whatever the thing that generates the most happiness and the least pain, that's the thing that you're allowed to do. So those were the two 18th, 19th century schools of thought that were very much in favor. At different times they've been in favor, and at different times they've fallen completely out of favor. And then the third big one is Aristotle.
So before we
You've
get
now
there,
all taken Philosophy 101.
all set?
You
I
get
see
full credit.
I see a couple of our philosophy faculty around here, and surely that was perfect, right? It's fine. Okay, we talked, Kant, not that great. Probably the hardest I laughed when reading your book was hearing a little bit more about who actually founded utilitarianism. Kind of a quirky dude, Jeremy Bentham. Talk a little bit about Jeremy Bentham.
Okay, so Jeremy Bentham, the first person to write about utilitarianism, very strange gentleman. When he died, he left his corpse in his will to his best friend, as you do.
Great.
And he wanted it essentially to be preserved and placed on display at the University of College London. And the idea, I believe, was that like his dead stuffed body would sort of would be welcoming new students onto the campus. And he didn't just want it for himself. What he hoped, if I remember correctly, was that all great philosophers would have their bodies also stuffed like scarecrows and placed so that new, like, your 18-year-old British youth stroll on their first day into campus and are met with 12 ghoulish dead philosophers like creepily beckoning them into the world of University College. The problem was it didn't work. Like, it didn't take, right? So they were like, they tried to preserve his head, his actual head, with some kind of like embalming fluid or something. And it's an amazing note, a historical note. It says, the results were not satisfactory. Just like that, whatever that was, it was horrifying, right? So they built a wax head, and they stuck the wax head on his like preserved body, which is still in an old suit of his that has like wire like coat hangers or something in it, so that he's like this flopping around. So he did this. The reason the university took this thing, which they call his auto icon, is because he had sort of found he didn't found the university, but he was like a sort of spiritual founder or associate or advisor or something. So I guess they felt like out of some kind of weird British loyalty or nobility, they had to do it. So they took this thing and they just shoved it in a closet. They just like put it really far out of sight until recently, when it turns out they dragged it out and now it's in a glass display. Like, he got his wish. It's in a glass display case at the front of the university, and apparently people have to like walk past it. And it's horrifying. Like, at one point they drag it out of the closet and moths had eaten through his clothes and they had to like replace. I mean, it's ghoulish and horrifying. Yeah. Anyway, that's the father of one of the most famous schools of thought in the history of the Western world, that guy.
So the staff of the Program for Leadership and Character is looking pretty great right about now by comparison. So that brings us to the other school of thought, virtue ethics. And for those of you who are a little familiar and have watched the show, I think my kids are leaving. Hi, guys. I think that the show becomes increasingly Aristotelian, at least as far as I can tell, over the course of it. And that means a lot of things. It means that we can talk a little bit about what virtue ethics is. But before we get to that, right, Kant, uptight punk, Jeremy Bentham, like...
Grade A weirdo.
Bonkers, yeah. Aristotle also kind of sucks. Right? Like, not the perfect exemplar.
I mean,
himself.
Look, he lived 2,400 years ago.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of, like, truly virtuous. At one point, all right, spoiler alert for those of you who haven't seen the show. At one point, when, I'm going to try to do this in a way that doesn't totally give it away. In The Good Place, The Good Place is a very limited, has very limited enrollment. Very few people get in. But we were at this moment where we were like, okay, Chidi should get as a present, like a little bonus, he should get to meet one of his idols in the actual Good Place. And so we started running down the list of like, who would it be fun to have be there? And it's like, you start going down the list and it's like, no, monster, yeah. Awful, Nazi.
Heidegger.
Wasn't a Nazi, but the Nazis loved him too much. That's Nietzsche.
Yeah.
So the Nazis like wiped out like a whole bunch of a wide swath of philosophers. And so we were like, okay, well, what about Aristotle? And it's like, if you read Aristotle, he writes so much about how slavery is fine. Like, so much. Like, endless papyruses about how great slavery is and why it's actually totally cool. He also thought that the only people even capable of achieving the virtue, as he described it, were men.
Yeah, I'm
so it's
definitely not a person in this system.
Yeah, you're not at all. You don't even count. He looked right past you. And so we got down. I actually emailed. So Todd May, who's a philosopher at Clemson, now retired. Boo, Clemson. ACC pride.
Excellent,
boo.
excellent.
He was an advisor on the book as well as the show, and I emailed him and was like, okay, which philosopher, any philosopher from history, doesn't matter, which philosopher would actually have made it to the Good Place? And he paused for like 12 seconds and then said, I'll have to get back to you. And like the next day was like, all right, I've got like a couple candidates. I mean, these are like the greatest thinkers who ever lived. None of them really hold up under scrutiny for obvious reasons. So we eventually settled on a woman named Hypatia of Alexandria, who Lisa Kudrow played in the show, and I read about her and I was like, yeah, this might be the only person that I know of who like had a shot. So anyway, the point is Aristotle, not great, but we're gonna cut him some slack for existing like 2,400 years ago and try to judge him by the standards of the day, which is a half measure, but I think, you know, otherwise you wouldn't be able to read any philosophy at all.
Yeah, for sure. And for that matter, how will people judge us for whatever it is, how we're sitting in these, I mean, there are so many extenuating factors. That said, I think that studying these things, thinking about these things, questioning these things, you can learn something. And one of the, you brought up a little while ago, you were born a sort of very rule-following kid. One of the things I like about Aristotle is not the fact that I would not be a person in his system, but is the fact that he seems to think we can get better. Maybe not we can be perfect, but we can get better. Do you agree with that? Do you think we can become better? And if so, how?
Yeah, so when I first had the idea for the show, I wrote to a woman who teaches at UCLA named Pamela Hieronymi, because she had written a couple papers on ethics that I liked a lot, and I said, hey, I'm a TV writer and I'm doing this show and I need some help and guidance. Would you be willing to sort of sit with me and help me? And she said, sure. So I went and met with her, and I was like, okay, let me explain the premise of the show just so you know what I'm dealing with here. And I said, so it's about a woman, there's a good place, it's sort of a paradise, and she gets in, and it's very clear right away that she doesn't belong there. And the idea is that she will try to become a good person in order to sort of earn her spot. And Pamela Hieronymi said, yeah, that's impossible. The central premise of your show is deeply flawed. You shouldn't do this. Which wasn't like exactly what I wanted to hear. But she is of the school of thought that you can't try to become a good person, because all you do, it's in the fake it till you make it kind of a way, all you do is you get better at faking it. You don't ever, if you have to try, then you'll never actually get all the way to being good. And I said, well, does anyone ever think, is there ever been someone who thinks that what I'm gonna write about is possible? And she was like, maybe Aristotle. And I was like, great, that's my guy, Aristotle. So I believe that the way that he writes about virtue and the way that he suggests we live our lives, I think it does. I think the whole point of it is that you get better, because it's something amounting to trial and error. There is a perfect amount of these virtues, these means, he calls them, that are the dead solid perfect amount of every virtue, whether that's generosity or courage or dutifulness or anything else. And our job is to find it, and the way that we find it is we do something, and then we kind of think about what we did, and we examine our behavior, and we think like, oh, I'm trying to be mild, which is the mean of anger, he calls it. And so like maybe I got too angry there, and the next time we're in a situation, you don't speak up loudly enough when something is happening that you object to, and it's like, I didn't quite get angry enough there, and you keep kind of like closing in on that mean. To me, that's getting better. Like that's his whole thing, is like, no one is born with any of these virtues in the right amount. It's a lifelong process of searching for them and trying to attain them, and it's a real, like, the journey is the destination kind of a deal. Like, he's suggesting that we all have the ability to do this. Well, free males have the ability to do this. You don't.
Nope.
But the point of it is, it's about the trying. It's about the attempt. It's about the kind of constant searching and examining and rethinking and reevaluating. So I don't know what that is if it's not getting better.
I really value that, and I do think that maybe I can get a little bit better, even though I'm not a guy. But I am curious, you talk in your book, and I've heard you talk on other occasions, about how part of your idea behind the show, right, and in the premise, right, is that these people, they live on Earth, they're either dirtbags or wonderful or whatever, and someone, the great cosmic scorekeeper, is keeping score. And I've heard you talk about how you, as a very dutiful person, you with your mouthwash, want it to matter that you followed those rules. I am curious, maybe what Dr. Hieronymy would say, maybe what you would say, maybe what the show is suggesting. Does wanting it to matter undermine the desire to be good, right? Is wanting there to be a great cosmic scorekeeper who says, you're right? Is it more important to be right or to actually be good?
Well, me wanting it to matter is futile, I would say, because I don't have any particular religious upbringing, so I have never believed personally that there is a afterlife reward one way or the other for action. I am also acutely aware that there are any number of people in the world now who don't seem to care at all about doing the right thing. In fact, they seem to derive great joy in deliberately doing the wrong thing, or a thing that just causes, like, trolling people,
Yeah,
or
the internet
whatever.
makes us all horrible.
Internet's a very bad place, and no one should use it. And not only do they not care, they appear to be rewarded for it. Like, some of the most powerful people and the wealthiest people and the people with the highest status in the country are people who got there by seeing virtue or social contracts or anything else as obstacles to achieving what they want. And so I used to play this game as I drove around Los Angeles, which was I'd be stuck in traffic and someone would pull into the breakdown lane and speed past me. It was almost always a middle-aged man in a Mercedes.
But he counts. He matters.
The rules don't apply to him.
Yeah.
That's what he's saying, right? It's
Yep,
like,
totally.
I don't have to wait. I have a Mercedes. I don't have to do this. So I would, in order to stay sane, I would ascribe him a negative point value. I would say that guy lost 18 points, and that's why it's okay that I'm like, it's how I, like, stopped myself from having road rage. And so that was sort of the genesis of the show, was like, it's a fantasy world that someone is actually keeping score, and that these things do matter, because generally speaking, they don't. That guy's not going to get stopped by a police officer and given a ticket, like, more often than not. Sometimes the universe magically aligns, and people who do bad things, whether small or large and significant, actually are called to account for them and actually have to suffer consequences. But generally speaking, it doesn't happen that way. So the show was my way, at some level, of, like, playing out a fantasy where everything matters, because I cared about everything. So I don't think that, the question really that you're asking is, like, does caring about that undermine the action of trying to be good, right? Like,
Yeah,
is
like
being too...
essentially, basically, is impact more significant in goodness or intent, right?
To me, where I ended up is intent. To me, the conclusion that I've come to, right or not, is that the most important aspect of being a positive moral agent on the earth is that you care one way or the other, whether what you're doing is good or bad, better or worse, and that you're just trying. That the engagement and the intent is the most important thing. And the reason I think it's most important is because even if you do care a great deal, you still screw up all the time. So if you start to measure yourself just based on the results, if you're a utilitarian about this, then you're going to be discouraged so often, because you will do something you believe is good and then the result will be bad. And I think that can be very damaging. I think it can start to make people flinch and also come to something akin to the feeling that Eleanor Shellstrop had very often, which was like, what's the point of any of this? Like, why are we even trying? There's no point. There's an episode early on where there's a flashback to her life on Earth, and she gets coffee from this coffee place near her house, and her boyfriend says, like, oh, we shouldn't go there anymore. That guy was caught sexually harassing his employees. And she's like, but the coffee's so good. And he's like, but come on, like, there's a million coffee places. Let's just go to a different one. This guy's a total sleaze. And then the way she lashes out, because Eleanor is a world-class lasher-outer, is to say, like, hey, I got tickets for a Phoenix Coyotes game tonight. Oh, except 2 of the players had DUI, so I guess we can't go see them now. And let's go see this band in concert. Oh, it turns out that he cheated on his taxes, and so we can't see him. Like, her attitude is the attitude of a lot of people I've known in my life, which is to say, when you say, oh, this thing is bad or wrong or we shouldn't use it, the response is, yeah, but everyone sucks. Yeah, everyone's bad, so it doesn't matter, as if like, that's just no way to go through life in my mind. It's like her boyfriend's response is my response, which is, well, shouldn't we try? Like, we should try. We could go to a different coffee place, get coffee from that place, and that guy could turn out to be like running a puppy mill out of the back of his coffee place or, or whatever. And you're like, okay, we tried, and then it failed, and so we'll try again. Like try again, fail better is this little aphorism from a Samuel Beckett piece of Samuel Beckett writing that Todd May brought to my attention. I know Clemson, boo. But that to me is the essence of what I personally believe. Like, just keep trying. You're gonna fail again, but try to fail in a better way than you failed the first time.
I think you opened the book actually with a Maya Angelou quote, which Maya Angelou, Wake Forest, yay! But it says the same thing, right? It's this concept of improving and getting better. And so, a handful of students had lunch with you today, and one of them raised this question that I think is a really good one, and I hear come across my desk over and over and over again from all of you having panic attacks with me, which is so fun. And it is this question of, okay, so how much good am I obligated to do, right? How much am I called to go out and save the world and make humanity better, pro humanitate, before I completely collapse from exhaustion? Where is the line? How do I know how much good I'm obligated to try and accomplish?
Right, so this is a problem with utilitarianism, specifically, I think, because they said like maximize good, look at the results of what you did, maximize good, minimize pain, but they never put a limit on it, right? And so if you follow it out to its logical conclusion, and there are some arguments that will try to disabuse you of this notion, but you follow it out to its logical conclusion, it's like, well, I shouldn't be here right now talking to you fine people because Hurricane Ian ripped through Florida and got all the way up to close to where we are now, and there's a lot of people who were in a lot of pain, and so if I want to maximize happiness, I should leave right now and go get on a plane and go to Florida and try to spend all my time helping the victims of Hurricane Ian. And while I'm there, earthquake might happen in Indonesia, and then I should leave the victims of Hurricane Ian because I've calculated that actually the people in Indonesia are in more pain, and so I would actually create more happiness by going and helping them, and it can get very silly very quickly. There's a wonderful philosopher named Susan Wolf who teaches at UNC, boo, boo, Chapel Hill, and
Susan Wolf, weird.
And she has a wonderful paper called Moral Saints, where she talks about this exact issue, and basically what she says is, whether you're coming at this from a utilitarian point of view or a deontological point of view, the line in the paper that I love so much is, there seems to be a limit to how much morality we can stand, meaning you cannot make everything, every action in your life, every moment of your life, every event in your life about morality, or you will go crazy. You'll just lose your mind, and you will not be living anything resembling a full, interesting life. Like, you won't have friends, and you won't like go to concerts and have dinner parties and like sit on the couch and watch TV, all of which are important parts of just living the life that each individual deserves. There's another philosopher named Bernard Williams who talks a lot about integrity, meaning not integrity like honor or something, but integrity in the sense of like being a whole and complete person. And he hated the utilitarians because he felt like what that math, those calculations ask you to do is divide yourself into parts by saying some of which you wouldn't recognize as being yourself. Like if, for example, a famous utilitarian thought experiment, you're on vacation, you go for a walk, and you come upon a sheriff, and the sheriff is holding 10 locals at gunpoint. And he says, oh, here's how this town works. To maintain law and order, every once in a while, I round up 10 people at random, and I kill them all. Philosophy thought experiments are real weird.
Real weird.
And he says, I killed 10 people, but now that you're here and you've stumbled into this scene, this is a special occasion, so I will give you the gun, and you can just kill one person at random, and that will be today's lesson in law and order. And the question is, should you do it? And the problem is, utilitarians, very, very, very strict utilitarians, might say, yeah, you should do it, right? 1 person, 10 people are going to die, and if you kill the person, then only 1 person dies. That's better. You're creating less pain and suffering by doing this thing. And Bernard Williams says, well, the question, it can't be whether it's okay for an imaginary person to kill 1 person to save 9 lives. The question is whether it's okay for you. Like, you have to live with this decision. If you pull the trigger, even though your utilitarian calculator will say you did a good thing because you saved 9 lives, you killed a guy. And for no reason, a person who didn't deserve it. And so he believed in that sense of like, you can't, utilitarians ask you to divide yourself and compartmentalize and do things on occasion that don't, that you wouldn't recognize as being things that you would ordinarily do. And I think that's a very good argument against that particular school of thought.
Another one, not to get, I mean, I'm hearing again some sort of virtue ethics themes in here, right? And another one I think is, what is the role of humility in that, right? And the assumption that you can single-handedly save humanity because you can hop on a plane and go to Indonesia and also help the victims of Hurricane Ian and also run a ethics program at Wake Forest, right? One of the values, I think, in a virtue ethics approach is that the different virtues mitigate others, right? And humility might mitigate courage to a point, knowing that I might have the courage to help all of you, but I know I'm 1 person and I can't save everyone's life. And I think that is a really, really helpful approach. And the second one, I think the show does such a good job of taking these like silly thought experiments to the nth degree and saying how ridiculous it is to be this like fully good person. So the folks that run the good place, right? Do we have any divinity students in here? Nicole, excellent. So my husband and I met in divinity school. And when we watched this part of the show, and they're all like, yeah, how can we help you? We were like, that's divinity students. Like, y'all are so nice. We weren't that nice in divinity school. But it was this great moment where you see people, and they sometimes get walked all over. And you do a great job in the show of taking these sort of silly things to the nth degree, of making people happiness pumps, as you call them.
Yeah, well, the happiness pump in the show is named Doug Forsett.
Yes.
And he has come to the conclusion that that to get into the good place, he just needs to do nothing but rack up points. And so he spends his whole life, like he lives in a tiny like house with like no electricity. He only eats lentils because he read somewhere that lentils require the least amount of water to grow. He drinks his own recycled urine because he doesn't want to disturb the local otters who play in the river near his house. Like, and that is another criticism of utilitarianism called being a happiness pump, which is, again, you're not living a life. You're a battery that's powering the lives and happinesses of other people, which is no way to live. The folks who run the good place, it's funny that you identify them as divinity school types, because to me they were just Democrats. It's me working
Potato.
It's me grinding an axe about the contemporary Democratic Party, because they're just like these super well-intentioned folks who at one point one of them says, like, they're in a negotiation with another character who's a demon, and the demon keeps making the deal worse and worse. And one of the good place folks says, like, I think it's really incumbent upon us to just keep negotiating and keep making concession after concession until this demon finally gets what he wants. and that was how I saw things going for the Democratic Party at some level at that time. So that was the intention, was like they're very well-intentioned people who want the world to be good, and they just don't have no backbone and no spine, and as a result, nothing good ever happened, really, because they weren't actually sticking up or taking a position. Yeah, so many committees, yeah, committee after committee after committee. There were committees to study the committee, and then there were committees to review the work of the committee to study the committee, and nothing ever got done, so.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I think that this show illuminates is there are sort of 4 core human characters. I would say there's 6 core characters, but one's a demon, one's not a robot. And the other 4 are humans, and they do get better. And I feel like the show makes a pretty strong statement about how that happens. So can you say a little bit more about what is the story embedded in there? These 4 people, what happens that helps them become better?
So the ultimate position that the show took was that we become better. If we can become better, we will become better through our necessary relationships with other people. That this is not a thing, and this is part of why Kant loses me a little bit. I don't think that you can improve as a person on your own. I think that the way that we work out what to do, what not to do, what's a better or worse sort of thing to do is by negotiating with other people. And that came largely from a book by Tim Scanlon called What We Owe to Each Other, the very title of which suggests that we owe things to each other, and now the goal is to figure out what it is that we owe to each other. And he basically thought that the way that you do this is you're starting a society, you get everybody in a room and sit around a big table, and everybody starts pitching rules for the society. And the rules that we adopt are the ones that no one can reasonably reject. So you sit around a table and you start pitching rules, and someone says we shouldn't be allowed to murder. Anybody object to that? Nope, good, check, that one goes in the book. You do the basics first, and then you start getting into like some more complicated stuff and nuanced stuff, and everybody has a veto for every rule, so it has to be unanimously sort of accepted. And I think this is like a kind of an amazing theory. It's also a little bit of a fantasy, and it also, when I describe it, people are like, no way would I ever do this, because are you kidding? Like, I wouldn't do that like in my own family. Like people, there are completely unreasonable people all around us, or at least people that we think are unreasonable, and they might think we are unreasonable. And the idea of trying to work out rules for how we ought to live with those people seems like a losing proposition. But the key to this is the objections have to be reasonable. Like, they have to justify their belief in why the rule should be rejected, just as you would have to justify that belief if you were objecting to a rule. And so I think as wild an idea as it sounds, I think that given that we have to live together, we share the earth and we share towns and we bump into each other in the supermarket and we do all sorts of things together in the same place, in offices and parks and wherever. I think it's a good idea in theory to try to work these ideas out with each other instead of disappearing into a room, deciding what the rule is, and then returning and laying down the law. So that the way that the four of them ultimately become better really is through their relationships with each other. They learn things from each other, they help each other, they get feedback and pushback from each other when they do certain things. And that is if there's a similarity, I would say, in all of the shows I've worked on, like, this is the ethics version of that, but that is a running theme through the shows I've worked on, is that the relationships we have with each other are the things that ultimately kind of lift us up.
I really love that in this context, especially because as academics, right, that's what we do. We go into a room for 7 years and write 700 words on a topic that no one else can understand, and then we have a dissertation and people get to call us doctor, right? That's really not a great way to come to ideas. And so to bring it back to the show and the writing of the show, you don't do that in comedy writing. You don't sit alone in a room and write this show. And so I want to know, what have you learned about the world from creating in community? And what do you think comedy writers might be able to teach us ethicists about how to move forward? Stealing Brian's question from earlier today. We could use some help.
Well, so TV comedy is a team sport. And there are multiple teams. So there's the writers, which are usually 8 to 12 folks in a room working on the show. There has never been in history a comedy show that would have been better if only one person had written the whole thing. There have been dramas that have worked that way, I think, but comedy, forget it. It requires a lot of perspectives and joke tellers who come at things from different angles. So it's a team sport, and then it starts with the writers as a team, but then you add the actors and you add the other the costumers and the props people who are very funny often and come up with good jokes by themselves, and it's an enormous collaboration, and that is why it's good. Like you need a lot of different people weighing in. As far as what we could teach philosophers or ethicists or academics, I truly believe that there's no better delivery mechanism for a message comedy. It doesn't matter what the message is. Like, I believe that people are more apt to listen to you and what you have to say if they're being entertained and they're laughing while they listen to it. Much of philosophy is not super funny.
Not that.
It's not like the funniest stuff I've ever read.
Could be. Depends on how you read it.
I contend that some of it is unintentionally funny.
Again, Jeremy Bentham.
Jeremy Bentham, but also a lot of the thought experiments are very funny. The
Oh.
trolley problem in particular is not intended to be funny, but is super funny.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
So it's, I think that the essential problem in academia generally and philosophy specifically is that the barrier of entry is already so high that if it's presented, I mean, Scanlon's book, a book I love, and we talked about it on the show a number of times, I never finished it. And I never will. It's so dry and so hard to get through. By the way, no one tell him. He's still alive. Nobody tell him. I just realized, and someone's recording. Erase this part of the... So I think that if the ideas in philosophy or in any academic discipline could be it's not that it has to be a comedy routine or a half-hour network comedy or something, but just if the ideas can be relayed in a more engaging way, I think that there are more people. I mean, it's why I wrote this book, honestly. It's like, I think that the philosophy is a thing that I feel like has helped me greatly in my life, that I found fascinating, that sparked a lot of interesting discussions, that led to me making better decisions, and despite my like fervent enthusiasm for the subject, I find it difficult to get through a lot of it just because of the presentation. Now look, some of it is like, he was an 18th century Prussian, wasn't like thinking like, how can I make this super funny to like someone in America in 2022? It's not their fault, but there's also even the contemporary distillations of recent continental or ancient philosophy are pretty dry themselves, and I think it's a shame because again, I think there's a lot of people who would be super into it if they could just, if it were more engageable.
Yeah. Well, I will say that is one of the things I think has been really fun about getting a bunch of us out of our dissertations and into the same building, but mostly with students that are asking these questions together. They can riff off of each other, and I don't know, I think in Starling Hall we probably laugh harder than I've ever laughed in any other workplace. I'm seeing lots of nods from like regular Starling folks. I see you, Julia, I see you, Rachel. We've got some Starling Hall regulars around here. But I do think that's true, right? That part of what is working is that the students are infusing what we're doing, and they are super funny. And that has been really helpful. So one of the things that I want to make sure we get to, in your book, you know, we talk about how community is what it makes it possible, right? Friendships of accountability, mentors, teachers, helpers, that's how we get better. And sometimes those people shed a light on us that makes us look stupid or bad and helps us see our flaws, and that's really, really hard. And we live in a moment where we don't apologize well, we don't own up to our mistakes well, and when someone does admit to a mistake, we sometimes say, okay, you're no longer valid, right? That's a really rough way to get better. You tell a great story in your book about how apologizing and owning up to your own mistake helped you become better. And I think it's just such a great practical example. Will you talk a little bit about your Kickstarter experience?
Yeah, this far predates Kickstarter, but so 2005, my wife is crawling along in traffic and bumps into the guy in front of her. There's a police officer nearby who comes over, doesn't see any damage, they exchange numbers and they go on their way. A couple days later, we get a note from this gentleman that says that his entire bumper needed to be replaced and it was gonna cost $836. I, myself, am very anti-car. I don't like cars. I think cars are big, dumb metal boxes that bring us from one place to another. I don't understand why anybody likes cars or cares about cars. I never wash my car.
Agreed.
I can't see through my windshield. It's probably very dangerous because it's so dirty.
Same.
But I think being fetishistic about cars is weird. I don't relate to it at all. So I get the sense that this dude is like a car dude, and a car dude in LA is like my mortal enemy. Like that is a person I do not like or relate to. So I get very worked up, and I go and I examine his car bumper, and if I get down really close to the bumper, I can just see this little tiny line, like very faint line. Like if you were hanging something on your wall and you took a pencil and you made like a little line to indicate like this is level, you know? That's what it looked like. So I was like, listen, man, listen, car dude, this isn't $836 worth of damage. It's impossible. Like, and I said, you know, this is why car insurance rates are so high. And I basically, upon reflection, told him like, you're wrong. You shouldn't care about this. Which is, if I had been more self-possessed, I would have been like, this probably isn't cool. Like you probably shouldn't just say like, don't care about the thing that you care about to someone. That's not nice. But I did. So this was during Hurricane Katrina. New Orleans was being like wiped off the face of the earth, and I had a good friend there that I had just been to visit, and his family had to evacuate, and we were just very like worked up about Hurricane Katrina, understandably. And so I said to this guy, okay, how about this? I will donate $836 to the Red Cross in your name if you just don't file this insurance claim and fix your bumper. And he was like, I'll think about it, or whatever. So I went back to work, because I worked at the show The Office at the time, and I told the people that I worked with about what had happened, and then they jumped in and started pledging more and more money to the Red Cross if this guy didn't get his bumper fixed. So soon it was like $1,500, and then it was like $2,000, and then it was like $5,000, and then I started a blog, and I was like, wrote the whole story, and I was like, if you want to pledge money to the Red Cross, if this guy doesn't get his bumper fixed, so weird. So it was one of the first things I know of that like went viral. This is 2005, it's a long time ago. The internet is in its nascency, and within 24 hours, there were more than $25,000 pledged to the Red Cross if this guy didn't get his bumper fixed. And the guy, by the way, knows none of this is happening. He's completely in the dark. So somehow it got back to, NPR called me and wanted me to come on the radio. Good Morning America wanted me to come on Good Morning America to talk about this. And I promise you, no one in history has ever thought more completely that he was right about anything. I was like, every single thing that happened, I was like, this proves that I am awesome and great. Everything is great. I'm doing the right thing.
You're cut from the exact same cloth as my 7-year-old.
Yeah,
So yeah.
It's roughly a 7-year-old mentality.
That's good, yeah.
So I went home on the second day, and now we're at like 30 grand is being pledged, and I'm gonna talk to the New Yorker the next day, and and I'm telling my wife about all this stuff, and I look over, and she's got this look on her face. And as soon as I saw the look on her face, I think God had got the same look on my face, which was like, this is wrong and bad, and I don't know why. Like, it struck both of us at the exact same moment. This is bad. Mm-hmm. Why is it bad? Dunno. I had not quite a panic attack, but something approaching a panic attack, because the wheels of the internet were in motion. Like, this was like the horse was out of the barn. So that was the first day. I realized at some point this is a question of ethics. And I had taken like 2 philosophy classes in college and didn't remember anything. And so I stayed up all night. I literally didn't sleep that night and read theories of ethics. I was like, okay, internet, tell me what ethics is. And I started emailing philosophy professors literally at random, at 4 a.m, saying like, I'm a TV writer and I have a weird problem and you gotta help me. Like, this is an emergency.
The ethics professor dream.
Well, that's the thing. This was so funny. So every single person I emailed wrote me back. Every single one of them.
Of course they did.
Philosophy professors love talking about philosophy. Every single one of them called me back, and they walked me through a different argument. And interestingly, in classic academic philosophy fashion, they did not agree. Some of them said, this is absolutely wrong. You are not allowed to, as Kant said, use people to get what you want. That is what you're doing. You're dragging a completely unrelated thing into this equation of this negotiation you and your friend are making, or this guy are making, and wrong, 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 bad, bad, bad. Another guy who was a utilitarian said like, it kind of sucks for this guy, but 30 grand is going to go to hurricane victims, like more happiness than pain, like maybe that is okay. But as we talk through that, utilitarians also have a thing where, okay, let's say that's true. 30 grand goes to hurricane victims. Only one man experiences pain and sadness, so maybe that makes it okay. John Stuart Mill did some good work cleaning up a lot of Bentham's messes, and one of the things he said was, well, think about this, though. Like, you have to account for the fact that when you do something like this, that everyone who lives in this society will now know that it happened, and thus would know that it could someday happen to them. And so in this case, everyone gets into minor disagreements with people, and everyone would thus know that at any moment the person they're in a disagreement with could grab a completely unrelated tragedy and just use it as a club to like bash them over the head, making the basic negotiation of a basic simple problem between two people impossible. So everyone would be a little bummed out, and so the total amount of pain that I've created might be way more than just the pain felt by that guy. On and on and on and on and on. So basically, at the end of the day, like, I didn't get an answer, because there is no answer, right? But generally speaking, I felt like, based on what I had done, that I was on like one side of the line, and on the other side was like Aristotle and John Stuart Mill and Jeremy Bentham and Immanuel Kant and Tim Scanlon and every other philosopher in history. And generally speaking, if you're on one side of an argument and everyone else is on the other side, you're fucked up, right? So I
prefer forked. Forked.
Sorry, you forked up. That will make literally no sense to the people who've never seen the show.
I know. Just trying to make sure that you guys know you have homework to do.
So I was like, okay, what do I do? What do I do? I royally screwed up. And so the first thing I did was I called Good Morning America and NPR and all these other people, and I said, I'm sorry, I'm not going to, I don't like this, I don't endorse this anymore, and I'm not going to talk about it. I forgot to call the New Yorker, who called me the next day and interviewed me, and I was like, should I? Then I had this weird ethical, I was so deep into ethics, I was like, I did promise this guy I would have an interview, and I was,
What do I owe to who?
yeah, I know. But the important thing is I called the guy, I told him the entire story from beginning to end. I apologized profusely. Before I made the call, I had written a check for the total amount, put it in an envelope, and mailed it to him. And I was like, I can literally say the check is in the mail. And I just apologized. And I said, I really didn't intend this. I'm sorry. I got too worked up, and this wasn't fair to you, and I'm sorry. And he said, well, maybe I'll give some of the money to the Red Cross. And I said, that would be lovely, but you are under no ethical obligation to do that. Like, my head was swimming in ethics. And the effect of it, what was interesting about it, I think the most, was, besides the fact that it sort of created my interest in the subject, the act of apologizing was the best I had felt in months and months and months. Like, from way back before any of this had happened. Like, I was positively skipping down the street. And it reinforced for me a lesson I've learned numerous times in my life, which is, nothing feels better than copping to a mistake that you've made. It's in the moment, it's shameful and embarrassing and sweaty and miserable and awful, and you feel terrible, and it's terrible, terrible, terrible. And the aftermath of it is a weight is lifted off your shoulders, and you go back to being something resembling yourself. And it was a really important lesson for me in a number of ways, but maybe the most important one was like, man, just say you're sorry. Just do it. Like, you know, the thing is, when we get into these situations, not that one's weird, but similar situations.
You do this.
Yeah. You know you have to apologize, right? You know, your brain is like, you screwed up. You got to apologize. And then we work so hard to not apologize. We will do literally anything. We will make any excuse. We will drag it out as long as we can. We'll duck calls. We'll pretend we're not home. We'll do anything to avoid looking someone in the eye and saying, I'm sorry, I blew it. And I am not perfect in this regard. There's like 11 red ledger notices right now that I haven't cleaned up that I do apologize for. We all have them.
But you know it's 11. That's pretty impressive.
But the amount of good or at least the amount of better I felt after I apologized, I can summon that feeling right now. I can remember palpably what it felt like to clean that up out of my life.
Yeah, this is the danger of philosophy, is now we could get into the cycle of, is it selfish to apologize because it makes me feel better, right? But that's something that I think about a lot with students is it's so much more enjoyable to move through the world being nice to people. If I have to be mean to people all day, it's just so negative and awful, right? And it's part of why writing the characters you do has to be more fun to hang out with the Leslie Nopes of the world than like Thrasher killer guys.
Yeah, but it's not just about being nice. It's like, that's, again, like the key is like you're gonna screw up, like all the time. And then the question is like, all right, well, what's next? Like you can't undo it, can't go back in time. So the way to like, I think of apologies as like exit interviews a little bit for in the search for virtue. It's like an exit interview. It's like, okay, where did I go wrong? What pain did it cause? How do I like let's evaluate this and try to like put a punctuation mark at the end of this bad sentence that caused someone pain, and it just helps you process and helps you like understand what it is that you did that you should do better the next time.
I really, really value that. So, end of sentence, punctuation mark, last thought on that. Hostage room full of university type folks in here. If you had one thing that you would want to make sure that the Wake Forest community, as you understand it, hears tonight before we all go, what do you think it is that we 21st century educated types ought to be thinking about, ought to know, that you might have a little piece of advice for us?
Oh, brother. Todd May, Clemson Boo, asked me a similar question in a thing we were doing together. And I gave this really long, convoluted, rambling answer that didn't really track and made no sense, and that I ended up like apologizing. Yeah, yes, very, very like academic philosophical answer. And he was sort of looking at me, and I was like, "What did you think I was going to say?" And he said, "I thought you were going to say other people matter." And I was like, "Oh God, that's so much better." Like, so it's other people matter. Like, I think that the essence of the shows I've written on, certainly The Good Place, certainly Parks and Rec, certainly Brooklyn Nine-Nine, like, if you want to distill those into like a Greek epigraph, basically, it's other people matter. And if you can manage to keep other people matter at the front of mind and as one of the main filters through which you run all of your decision-making matrices and everything else, I think it is a very good sponge that soaks up a lot of bad decisions. You know, I think it's a good barrier that keeps a lot of bad choices out of your life. So I'm going to stick with other people matter instead of the long, rambling, endlessly convoluted, impossible to decipher thing that I said the last time.
Save that for your dissertation. That'd be good. Well, because you matter and y'all matter, Michael Schur has been wonderful and said he'll stick around for a few minutes to sign the books of the fastest people who get up here. But before we break to do that...
Isn't it in the back? I think
yes,
it's in the
yes,
back.
yes.
Yeah.
Back up at the table, there's a banner. You'll go up the stairs, not up here, up there, and get your book signed. But I want to ask you all to join me in thanking Michael Schur for joining us.
Thank you so much.